They were quite certain that it would go to censure in the House. So for a while, they just put their heads in the sand and said, well, we don't have to deal with it. It's not going to come over here. But after this vote, you'll see now, Peter, there will be what we call here housekeeping votes, and they will be votes to make sure it goes to the Senate, votes to appoint what are called managers, essentially prosecutors from the House to Senate, votes to fund them, any money that they might require by way of hiring staff and all of that, and votes to present these articles of impeachment to the Senate.
That's the buzzer, the bell to summon members and tell them how long they've got left.
They've got 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes to come into the House. So
at the same time, they have beepers going off in their pockets and purses saying, "Get over there."
Now, talk a little bit more about the managers. In terms of personalities, they'll be a real clue for us as to the attitude, right?
I have a list of managers in my lap here, and they are Republican members of the House Judiciary Committee. Now, I assume that some Democrats will be added to this list, but this is a list of 13. These are people who have become familiar to those of us who have been following the Judiciary Committee, led by Chairman Hyde, Congressman Sensenbrenner, McCollum, Geekas, Kennedy, Boyer, Bryant, Shabbat, Barr, Hutchinson, Cannon, Rogan, and Graham. So we've seen them over the last few weeks in the Judiciary Committee, and it spans the Republican spectrum in the committee.
Okay, Koki, I wonder, I'm talking to our producer now, whether or not we want to go over the Pentagon for just a moment while we're waiting for the actual vote on this amendment and pick up a little bit of, all right, do we have access to the briefing? Do we have access to the briefing? I see that Secretary of Cohen is now briefing on this. Shall we go? Okie dokie. We did tell you where the Secretary of Defense was going to brief at 2 o'clock this afternoon on this campaign. We heard a little while ago that there had been another missile attack on Baghdad, not quite sure where it was. So can we go over to the Pentagon now and pick up what we can about the mission today? John, can we get the actual briefing itself? Is Secretary of Cohen actually briefing?
Yes, he is briefing now, Peter.
All right, can you hear it, John? Or
I can hear it in one ear.
Oh, well, it's not fair to you to ask you to hear in one ear and talk at the same time.
No.
Okay, we'll try. All right, here's Secretary Cohen. All right, we're having a little difficulty getting the Secretary's audio, but we will get it in just a second. There's no such thing as a little or a lot difficulty getting it, but you either have it or you don't. But the interest in this is because many people did expect that the Pentagon was not going to go on for this one more additional day now that Ramadan, the fasting month, has begun in the Middle East. And Tony Cordesman and other military analysts have said to us today that it was a strong reminder that there was a big job to do as far as they were concerned. They wanted to revisit some targets, had a lot of targets all over the country. Let's see if we can plug into the Secretary now.
Deadly weapons is one of the jobs that Saddam's security forces prevented the UN inspectors from performing. So the second area where the damage has been substantial is the command and control system. This network of communications, intelligence, propaganda, and security service headquarters has been significantly damaged. Saddam may rebuild and attempt to rebuild some of this military infrastructure in the future, just as he has replaced many facilities, including lavish palaces after Desert Storm. But we have diminished his ability to threaten his neighbors with both conventional and non-conventional weapons. In closing, I want to again call attention to the superior performance of both the United States and British forces. This action demonstrates the quality of the men and women we have in the military. They are well trained, they are well equipped, they are well led, and we owe them a great deal of gratitude. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As the Secretary noted, we are very pleased with the results of the operation thus far. In the primary areas of concern, facilities that support Saddam's weapons of mass destruction capabilities, his command and control, and the security forces associated with these weapons, we have had significant success in our airstrikes. However, it does appear that we've got to do a better job of translating the arcane science of battle damage assessment into plain English so that you can all relay the information more effectively to the public. So the burden is on us. The burden is to make a complex subject more understandable. On the plus side, as you will see in just a few minutes when Admiral Wilson briefs, I believe the numbers themselves are clearer today because we've had additional time to conduct our assessments. Let me take just a moment here to give you a flavor of what we call battle damage assessment. This first photograph is of the electronics plant. Here you can see three different impacts. The one on the left, our analysts assess as moderately damaged. The one here on the bottom, we assessed as destroyed, and I think you can see why. Basically, it's been rubbled. The last one on the upper right, you can see the crater near the corner of this building. Our analysts assessed this impact as having produced light damage. But to put this in perspective, I'll show you some other facilities where we saw explosions outside of buildings that were much smaller than the explosions caused by this weapon. Give me a second photo. I'm sure you recognize these as our two embassies, the one in Tanzania, the one in Kenya. As you can see, when you have a chance to get a different angle or a ground view, your sense of damage can be quite different. Our analysts classified this damage as light to moderate when all they had was overhead imagery to go by. Again, here's the Taji Missile Repair Facility.
Just while looking at these, just to pick up a little what we missed Secretary Cohen saying, he says the bombing has set back the Iraqi missile program by 1 year. And General Shelton is now talking about battle damage or bomb damage assessment at the moment because there has been some question about how successful they've been. This is the Taji Missile Repair Facility.
My point is, none of these buildings within this compound were assessed as destroyed, not even one. Our analysts are appropriately very conservative in their initial assessments, as I think you would agree in this particular facility. But in my view, this facility will not be usable for Saddam's efforts to maintain or improve his missile capabilities in the years ahead. I'd also like to point out, as you can see, many of the buildings in this facility appear to be undamaged. And the reason for that is because they were not targeted. We only went after specific buildings within the compound, again, ones that were related to our mission objectives. I'll leave the rest of the details to Admiral Wilson. To sum up, I am very pleased with the results of our strikes. The plan is being executed with precision and success. Before we take your questions, let me update you for just a second on the status of our operation right now. As you know, U.S. and British forces are again striking targets in Iraq as we speak. To update last night's actions, all of our pilots and our air crews returned safely from yesterday's airstrikes. We conducted approximately 150 combat and combat support sorties last night over Iraq, as well as some additional Tomahawk and air-launched cruise missile attacks. While the Iraqis have not aggressively employed their substantial surface-to-air missile systems, we have encountered heavy anti-aircraft fire. Finally, I'd like to say again that we can all be proud of the way our men and women in uniform have carried out their assigned mission. They are superb professionals, as are those that are right now in the crisis response force that are starting to deploy even as the holidays approach. And I might add, as are all the members of our armed forces. My thanks go out to them and their families. Thank you.
General Lee Shelton, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Let's go to John McQuethy now at the ABC position at the Pentagon. John, you've want to sum up the overall what Secretary Cohen and he have put together for you today?
I think what they're trying to do, Peter, is to counter some of the reportage that has been, especially in the newspapers this morning. They tried to provide a statistical or numerical analysis of the different targets that they had hit yesterday, and many reporters found it difficult to figure out whether that was good, bad, or indifferent. And what they are trying to say this morning is they have done a lot of damage, even when a bomb or one of their missiles hits right next to a building. The damage inside the building can be enormous, and they will classify that as only a light hit.
On the other hand, as you've so often emphasized to us, you hit a building, you don't know what's inside it, right?
Right. When you hit a building, you don't necessarily stop a program. You don't necessarily kill the scientists and technicians that are the people that would put a missile or a chemical weapon together. But you have made it more difficult for them to come back in the morning and find a place to work.
As we look at this Defense Department footage, we're reminded again of what we saw during the Gulf War, and at the end of the Gulf War, it was determined that not as much had worked as had been advertised. General Shelton sounds somewhat more candid, John, about what worked and what didn't. Am I correct?
I think he is being, they are making an effort from the lessons of the Gulf War, where the bomb damage assessment made it appear, especially from these sort of pictures that we are seeing, the gun camera pictures, made it appear that the U.S. was hitting every target with every single munition. In no way does that really happen, and in fact in the Gulf War, as we now know, Peter, only 8% of the munitions that were used are these so-called smart weapons.
Right.
In the current conflict that we are engaged in for the last 4 days, 90 to 95% of that which has been unleashed on Iraq are of the more intelligent weapons, those that are more easily able to be guided to their targets.
This is our view of Baghdad just at about the time that the articles of impeachment were being voted in the House of Representatives. They've flown about 150 combat sorties or missions, as the phrase is now, in the last while. They've set up some additional cruise missiles, have not received any serious opposition from the Iraqis, though General Shelton did say, John, that they'd taken some fairly handy aircraft, and this is the sort of sheets of fire that they put up, at least where we can see them, lest they hit something by accident, right?
Well, the curtain fire, as it is called, Peter, is basically a wall of lead. All of these cruise missiles that come into their targets fly very low, which makes them difficult for an anti-aircraft missile to detect and to shoot down. But what they are attempting to do is put a wall of lead up to try to hit one of these cruise missiles. The other bombs, when they're on their way down, they have very little chance. So it's really trying to shoot a fish in a great big lake with a gun. Your chances are not great, but it's the only chance you have.
And in this particular campaign, or this particular operation, unlike the Gulf War, U.S. forces were able to stand off, to fire from a much greater distance and electronically guide their weapons in, thereby putting pilots particularly at less risk than they were in the Gulf, right?
That's right. On the first night, Peter, most of the attacks that the U.S. launched were unmanned missiles. And then as the attack progressed, the U.S. began using more and more manned aircraft, which are less expensive. The bombs per target are less expensive, but you do put a pilot at risk. But they're firing them from much greater altitude now and from greater range, making the pilots themselves much safer than they were during the Gulf War.
John, thanks very much for that briefing. Very much appreciate it. We want to go back to the House of Representatives now. Speaking on the floor at the moment is Henry Hyde, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois to proceed immediately on the resolution.
Well,
under the previous order of the House, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Hyde, will control 5 minutes, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, will control 5 minutes.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't...
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 614 resolved that Mr. Hyde, Mr. Sensenbrenner, Mr. McCollum, Mr. Geekas, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Booyer, Mr. Bryant, Mr. Shabbat, Mr. Barr, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Cannon, Mr. Rogan, and Mr. Graham are appointed managers to conduct the impeachment trial against William Jefferson Clinton, President of the United States.
This is the business of the House now to prepare for the trial in the Senate and the appointment of the managers, namely the people who will do the prosecution, and then we'll hear from the Democratic side on who will be the defense for the President in the Senate trial. Let us just review it for you, lest we be moving around so quickly that we not fully understand its importance. On Article 1, that the President committed perjury before a grand jury, it has been approved by a vote of 228 to 206. Article 2, that the President committed perjury in the Paula Jones case. Yes, 205, but no, 229, so that is rejected. Article 3, that the President obstructed justice. That was approved by a vote of 221 to 212. And Article 4, that the President abused his power. There's the largest margin, as you can see. 285 members of the House decided he had not, and 145 decided that he would. The first vote was announced, lest you be one of those who keeps a close record of history, at 1:24 Eastern Time today. This is Congressman Conyers from Michigan, who has run the Democratic side of debate today. He and Congressman Hyde are each going to have an opportunity now to make some concluding remarks on these articles of impeachment and talk about who's going to go forward and prosecute and represent in the Senate.
And I yield the balance of my time. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Illinois, yield back.
Yes, sir.
Gentleman from Illinois yields back.
Unusual.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to the previous order of the House, the previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker,
roll call, please. Michigan.
Mr.
May
Speaker,
we have a recorded vote?
Mr. Speaker, on that I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All in favor stand and remain standing. Sufficient number having arisen. The yeas and nays are ordered. This will be a 15-minute vote by electronic device.
Well, it's quite an extraordinary day. So let us now look forward to the Senate trial. We've been calling it a vote. We've been calling it an impeachment process. Now, unless something changes quite radically in the Senate, there's going to be a Senate trial of the President of the United States. Linda Douglas is on Capitol Hill. And I know you've been monitoring Senator Lott's office, the majority leader in the Senate. What have they got in mind as of now?
Well, Senator Lott has been saying all along, just as you've been saying all day long, there will be a trial. He's put a statement out which indicates that the trial might not start right away. I'm going to read you a little bit from it. He says the senators will be prepared to fulfill their constitutional obligations, but we must be judicious in any discussions of this matter. Therefore, he says, the Senate is organized. Once the Senate is organized as an impeachment proceeding, there will be pleadings and motions that come before the taking of evidence. In other words, motions that come before they have any trial. He says that makes it difficult at this time to determine when an actual trial will begin. That timing will depend greatly on the President and his lawyers. Now, what that means is that the Senate is likely to give time, it's not clear how much time, to the President to prepare for the trial or to make any motions. In the meantime, according to Lott's statement, perhaps the Senate could go along and do its other business. Now, it's not clear whether this signals any big delay. Some people think it will be something like maybe a month or so if he does grant the President that kind of time. And surely the Republicans are hoping to fill that time with discussions of tax cuts and education and so forth to try to get away from this subject.
It's going to be very hard. Thank you very much, Linda Douglas, very much for your reporting today. It's going to be very hard for people to focus on something else up there for the moment, or at least to wrench people's attention back to the other business of the nation. We're going to leave you shortly, but before we leave, perhaps some final thoughts from a variety of people. Michael Beschloss, on having watched all this today.
Well, the thing that really occurs to me is that what you would always want in the case of an impeachment is as much of a bipartisan vote as possible. If Richard Nixon had been impeached in 1974, he probably would have gotten maybe 90% of the votes in the House. There was actually a vote after Nixon resigned to put the House on the record. Had that gone to a Senate trial, he probably would have gotten perhaps 8 votes to clear him in the Senate. He almost certainly would have been convicted. So here you have a case in which the President has been impeached, but as far as the judgment of history is concerned, it would have been a lot better if that had been something less than a party line vote.
Michael, as we prepare to witness a trial in the Senate, what should we be watching out for as far as you're concerned?
One thing that'll be fascinating is the degree to which people are searching their own consciences. If you go back to Andrew Johnson in 1868, Johnson was saved by the vote of one senator from Kansas, right, Edmund Ross, who was told that if you vote to acquit Johnson, we will kill you, or at least we will defeat you. And he did vote to clear Johnson, but the result was he went back to Kansas, he was defeated, he was physically attacked. People would see him on the street and punch him out because they were angry about the vote he cast. He died in poverty, so he really suffered for that vote. But a century later, we look at him as someone who redeemed the Constitution.
It's interesting, one other cautionary note of Mr. Ross, they didn't think that's the kind of senator they were getting in the first place, did they? They thought they were getting a really tame animal when he came to the Senate.
That's exactly right, and it's one of these stories you love to see in American history, a seemingly small figure who demonstrates his stature at a moment of crisis.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael Beschloss. Some final thoughts from Jackie Judd. Jackie.
Peter, I guess...
Okay, hang on a sec.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Okay, here I am. I guess my final thought would be that it's been an extraordinarily bloody battle for the past 11 months. And there has been so much damage done to so many people, and I'm not talking only here about President Clinton and Ken Starr and his prosecutors, but some of the bit players who for one reason or another were dragged into it. And at the end of it, I think it could be argued that there really are no winners and no heroes.
Thank you, Jackie, very much. Sure. Jackie Judd, our reporter on this story from the very beginning. Bill Kristol?
Well, as a political analyst, I think it reminds one that politics is chemistry, not mathematics. Things have a chain reaction, and sometimes very unexpected things can happen, and we've seen that with this impeachment today, something none of us thought would happen on November 3rd, Election Day, or for that matter, 6 months ago, or certainly 12 months ago. As a Republican, and I've been a Republican for a while, and I've often been unhappy with the Republican Party, I wish the vote had been bipartisan, but as someone who thinks the vote was the right vote, I must say I am proud of the Republican Party today, which defied public opinion to some degree, may have acted contrary to its immediate political interest, but I do think the members of the Republican Party did what they thought was right.
Bill, do you think it's going to be as bloody from here on out as it's been up until now?
I think not, because I think the Senate, Hamilton says this in Federalist 65, that when you have moments of great contention, great occasion, like impeachment, there might well be a lot of partisanship. That's what the House does. It reflects public opinion and the partisanship of public opinion. The Senate is supposed to take a more judicious look at the evidence and at the merits, and I think that is likely to happen.
Thank you very much, Bill Kristol. George Stephanopoulos.
Peter, I think that when we go through this and look at this from the perspective of time, we're going to look not at the last 11 months, but at the last 25 years, starting with the president resigning in 1974 and the president impeached in 1998, and look back and say at a time when the United States was becoming ascendant in the world, a superpower, our political system was declining into what we heard today, the politics of personal destruction, and the next chapter will be how do we fix it.
Jeffrey Toobin. Thanks, George, very much. Jeffrey Toobin.
Peter, a generation or so ago, the subject of consensual sex almost never came up in our courtrooms, except in divorce cases. Here, you have a president who was questioned about it in the Paula Jones case, which is the cause of the Monica Lewinsky matter. You have Robert Livingston thrown out of office because Hustler magazine used its First Amendment rights to investigate his personal life, and under the First Amendment they have the right to do that. I wonder if these sorts of violations of privacy, which I think are at the core of the two dramatic events here, were a good development or a bad development for our country.
Thanks very much, Jeffrey Toobin. Nobody in this company of players is closer to Bill Clinton on a daily basis than Sam Donaldson. Sam, whither Bill Clinton as far as you're concerned?
Well, Peter, you spotted it. Bill Clinton is at the center of all this. No matter what you think of all the other characters that have been involved in this drama for the entire year. And I'm reminded of what Joe Klein, the writer who wrote the Primary Colors, first under the name of Anonymous, says. He says Bill Clinton is like the central character in The Great Gatsby. That is, he leaves behind him as he walks carnage, ruined lives. And not only his enemies, Newt Gingrich, maybe Bob Livingston, but his friends, the McDougalls, Webb Hubbell, and others. The president goes on, at least for the moment, but all around him there's carnage, and it's really very too bad.
Thank you, Sam. And no one has worked harder today to help us understand all this than Cokie Roberts up on Capitol Hill. Cokie, a final thought for now?
Well, Peter, I have to do a little bit of reporting before I give you a final thought, because while you were away from us for a moment, the Democrats chose not to participate in this impeachment trial in the Senate. They will have no managers on their side, so the partisanship will continue. I think that you will see a moment when the new House convenes where you have some more Democrats, where there will be an attempt to undo this little bit of housekeeping we're doing here and try to change the managers and cause some more brouhaha. And meanwhile, while all of this is going on,
hold it.
Yes.
Hold it. What do you mean the Democrats won't have any managers? What does that mean?
They have chosen not to participate in the trial.
Not to represent the president?
They will not. Well, the president will be represented by his lawyers, but there will be no Democratic House members. John Conyers got up and said that at a moment when you were talking to someone else, and they have opted out of this proceeding in order to underline what they see as the partisanship of it. And meanwhile, as I say, off the floor, while this incredibly historic moment has been going on the floor, Republicans have been meeting, having very serious discussions about who their next speaker might be. And all of that is it seems to be down to a few names: Christopher Cox of California, Steve Largent of Oklahoma, Dennis Hastert of Illinois. Maybe others will emerge. They're talking about bringing the new Republicans in next week and deciding all of this. I mean, so much is going on, and all that anybody who has been around here a long time, who's come in and talked to me, says is what we need is healing, and it looks like it's going to be a long time before that happens.
Thank you, Koki, very much. Whether you think it's a very sad day, as many people do, or whether you think it's a proof again that the democratic experience in America works with enormous vigor, albeit partisan, it is not a day we would have wanted to miss, and none of you clearly who've watched this would want to have missed it either. The president is going to talk to the nation today, we believe, and when he does, ABC News will be here to carry it live. There'll be a full wrap of this on World News Tonight on Saturday. You can always follow this, of course, and further on abcnews.com. There are those articles, the two which passed, Article 1 and Article 3 passed, the obstruction of justice or perjury before the grand jury, and the two abuse of power and perjury in the Paula Jones case, which did not pass. Bill Clinton at the gravest moment of his political career. Meanwhile, the United States goes on from both the Persian Gulf and from land bases elsewhere, continues to attack Iraq. The Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs saying they are, is the operative word of the week, are seriously degrading Saddam Hussein's ability to threaten his neighbors, set back the missile program by a year, said Secretary of Cohen. However, Saddam Hussein is still standing, which leaves this country with as many difficulties in other parts of the world as it leaves the country with as many difficulties in the House of Representatives and now in the Senate. And of course, the other big news of the day is Bob Livingston, who is the Speaker to be, or was to be the Speaker to be in the next Congress, resigns today, raising an issue of adulterous affairs and political careers, which some people today will think is every bit as serious in the long run as that which has happened to President Clinton. But we thank all those of you who have been with us throughout the day and that you will stay with ABC News for the remainder of this quite astonishing exercise in democracy. I'm Peter Jennings in Washington.
For continuing coverage of this story as well as the crisis in the Gulf, stay with ABC News and abcnews.com on the web and AOL. This has been a special report from ABC News.